All right, so here with the Secure Dynamics TechCast with me, I have somebody who's in front of the camera. I don't know how many 20 hours a week. James
A
Azar.
lot, a lot.
So this is, and it's so funny because we had something else planned, and then we just started talking about IoT security. We said, hey, this is something that is worth talking about. So that's going to be our topic. Again, introduction. James Azar is a CISO, CISSP certified, host of CISO Talk podcast, CyberHub podcast, cybersecurity board member, and the most important, espresso drinker.
I am an espresso drinker. I'm like 2 hours away from my last espresso. I'm like, my hands are shaking, my seat's rattling.
This is going to be fun. Hey, so let's talk about IoT security. And I was just telling you, I just posted something on LinkedIn after I saw this nursery cam, which was essentially anybody freaking downloading the app gets the default username password. And there's once you get access to the URL, you can obviously do the indirect reference and you can figure out others. So how does security play into these IoT manufacturers who probably have no insight into security at all, whether it's B2C or B2B?
So here's the challenge with IoT. One of the bigger problems with IoT is the fact that manufacturers don't really think about security. And security adds to the cost of the product, which hurts profit margins for these IoT companies, which a predominant amount of them are not large scale manufacturers. So it's a startup with a new idea. Mm-hmm. And we all know the inherent challenges of startups, from funding to building to manufacturing and to cost. I need to be $1 cheaper than my competitor on Amazon, so you buy my product, right? And inherently speaking, they don't do that. Now, here's something very interesting. And I got to tell you, this to me is just the ultimate fascinating thing. Think of that in medical devices.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right? Like we talk about nursery cameras and bad guys seeing you change your baby. And that's bad enough because I don't want to go down that ugly path of what that does.
Right.
But I mean, the FBI and a lot of law enforcement battles that kind of stuff day in and day out. But take it from a perspective of medical devices. So the biggest debate of 2020, I think beyond COVID, beyond work from home, the non-noise debate, the debate that's being done in CISO Slack rooms, in conversations in our own Zoom calls, right, is who's responsible for security on a medical device, the manufacturer or the hospital?
Yeah.
Now, keep that in mind that for the manufacturer, I'm not a CISO in a medical field, but I say CISO in medical field, you're responsible for security. And you and I look at the manufacturer and go, no, mister, bring me a product that has some security on it.
Right.
And that's a back and forth, but you can't not buy the product. And the medical field is a predominant monopoly, meaning that there's very little incentive to change because there's very little competition.
Yeah.
Think of drug companies, right? AstraZeneca, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, right? GSK, Teva, and I think a few more, right? Yeah. 6 companies that produce pills. And that's not competition. Think of soda, Pepsi and Coca-Cola. That's all you got.
Correct.
That's not competition. Those are monopolies. Those are consumer monopolies. So they can fix pricing. They can set a standard. And there's very little in the way of competition to change behavior, right? Coca-Cola and Pepsi have very little incentive to change their formula and the sugar that they use and all that stuff because they don't really have someone who's a third competitor that's really changing the way it's done. And when someone comes up to compete, they just buy them and kill them. And the same applies in IoT. There's very little incentive for security. So we as security people are outraged. But consumers, I don't care. And that's a sad statement.
Yeah, so one of the things you mentioned, right, in the, again, trying to contrast the nursery cam where consumers can actually vote with their dollars, which is one of the things I said. I mean, if you see this, stop buying that manufacturer. But like you mentioned, in the medical field, if I go in for a pacemaker, I don't have a choice, right? I just go in over there, and whatever the doctor or the provider, whatever agreements they have, oh, I don't want this. So, I mean, is it regulations? And you mentioned CISOs and manufacturers, but I mean, how does this thing ever get to a point where there is an awareness, number one, but number two, there's an incentive to do something about it?
So a lot of people always go down the regulatory route. And I just want to point out that we're a year into COVID, and we've relied on the people who make our rules to run this thing, and it's been an absolute mess. And I'll stop there. Okay? So it's not regulatory. It's deregulation that makes this work. Right? And that's the honest truth about business anywhere. When you add rules to something, people will always find a way to circumvent that rule.
I agree. Yeah.
When you open things up and you let the market speak, the market tends to go with what they want. So for example, the reason the medical field is very hard to get into is because of regulation. The regulation makes it so that a company has got to have so much money, meaning it carries so much risk to try to compete. Whereas, and if it didn't have all those regulations, then other companies could come in and compete with the big ones, because the barrier of entry is very, very low. And we see that all the time, right? In unregulated, I would say, like IoT. That's why there's like 700 IoT manufacturers, right? And what's going to end up happening is a lot of them are going to disappear. You're going to end up with a group. And then you're going to end up with a market leader. Now, that market leader is going to give you a great product at a great price. And if they address security, then you and I are going to be their evangelists.
Yeah.
Right? Which is mean more people are going to buy it. So then when people come and ask you, they go, as a security guy, which one are you getting? And you go, I'm getting, my brand, this brand right here. And they go, okay, I guess I'll order one as well.
No, that's a super great point that you mentioned, because I have this brand at home. Again, I'm not evangelizing that brand, but to your point, people understand that I'm a security and privacy person. They say, hey, do you have a webcam at home? And I said, I do. And so, which brand do you use? And I said, X. But before I chose that, I actually went to the freaking website, read the privacy policy, see what so in some sense, you're right. I think people like us have to become the voice and the mind that actually educates others, because expecting people to go to and read the privacy policy of an IoT manufacturer, assuming they even freaking have one, is unreal, right? So are you seeing more of these evangelists out there who are not just doing the right thing, but also educating the larger community?
So you're starting to see more of an idea around security and education, especially when it comes to IoT. I think one of the biggest IoT changes in the last year, by the way, because I don't want to focus on just what's bad. Yeah. Let's for a second look at something that's actually, there's something that's good that came out of COVID. All right. And your listeners are now going to look at me and listen, and they're shaking their heads and they're like, who's this idiot that Ashwin brought on the show? What is he talking about positive in COVID? And here's what I'll explain. Pre-COVID, you would buy any IoT device, you'd put it anywhere in your home. I, as a CISO in my company, had no right or rule over that dominion. Now came COVID, and now you're using my equipment on your home network. So you know what I've done now? I'm going to pay you money, Mr. Employee. I'm going to add $100 to your salary. You know why? Because you're not working from the office anymore. You're working from home. You've had to upgrade your internet, right? You've probably maybe have had to buy a new chair or something. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a stipend of $1,200 over the course of a year to help pay for all the things that are now in your house. By the way, here's a list of how we want you to set up your home network. Could you send us all this information? We in my company have a database of every single router that every single employee uses. Wow. And every single cable provider they use. We know who uses AT&T. We know who uses Verizon. We know who uses Comcast. We know what router they have. And with people who we see these routers are problematic, we'll just buy a router, send it to them, have them call our help desk, and we set up a completely separate network for them at home. Now, here's where this has helped us. You know, all those IoT devices you talk about, we're like, oh, what IoT devices do you have at home? Well, I've got a camera in my baby room, like you just said. Mm-hmm. And we have an Echo, and we have a Google Home, or we have a bunch of Bluetooth IoT speakers, or we have a smart garage, or okay, great. Let's find all those devices on your home network. Great. Now we're going to put them on this network. We're going to put them through a firewall. We're going to buy, here you go, buy a VPN. And what we ended up doing is we ended up securing like 30% of our home employees' networks.
Wow.
Which before COVID would have never done.
Right. That's amazing. I mean, but I'm almost guessing. I mean, James, you and your company are probably in the minority. Is it? I mean, is this becoming, because if this
it's
happens,
a trend.
It is. Okay.
It's a trend, I think, and it's going to become more and more of a trend as more people work from home, right? I mean, the thing about this kind of stuff is one of two things is going to happen. Now we're all going to work from home, and there's what they call the new normal, right? Working from home. And now we're dealing with SolarWinds and Accelsion and Centrion and a bunch of others. Now all the supply chain stuff starting to come out. You know, like they come in trends, right? Everything comes in trends, right? Everything comes in threes, right? SolarWinds, Accelsion, Centrion, done. Threes. That's going to be over with. Give it a month. We're going to have a new attack. Yeah. The new attack vector is going to be at home. I breached your company because your employee at home was on an unsecured network through his unsecured IoT device. I was able to skim passwords, credential stuffing, all kinds of stuff, intercept traffic, disguise traffic into your network because you're trusting that source. And then what we did will become the new norm, because then companies are going to be like, all right, what's it going to cost us to secure someone's home network?
Yeah.
$1,000? Fine. That's cheaper than not doing it.
Very true. I mean, I think what you're saying is makes so much sense right now, right? It's almost like the edge is in the home right now, and if you don't secure the edge, everything else is compromised. So I think this is great. I think one of the other things we should touch upon in a future conversation is the whole aspect of privacy. And this came about because I was reading, I think, Wall Street Journal yesterday, where this whole concept about kids going back to school. But then there's hybrid learning also, right? And you have webcams turned on. And in a traditional classroom, there are like 20 kids. You really don't know their socio-eco background. But now with the camera turned on, you can literally, looking at the background, looking at their room, you can figure out what kind of socioeconomic background they come from. But then storing of the data, who has access to the data? So it's a completely different realm that is opening up right now, just like you said, in this new COVID norm. And again, this goes back to those kids who pretty much have no
but I think that's going to be temporary. I think schools will be open by next school year. I mean, where I am in Georgia, our schools are open, and kids go to school 5 days a week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In person. Right? So I think there's, I think in most of the country by August, September, all kids will be back in school, and hybrid schooling will not be a thing. I think it won't be a thing because I think every single parent on planet Earth, I don't care what color, creed, race, gender you are, is like, take my kids from me. I love them, but I'm going to kill them. Teacher, you're getting paid my taxpayer money. I pay money so that you teach. Take my kid, teach them.
Okay, so let's watch that and see what happens in August. But you're right. I think back to the home worker, if you will. I think that's a permanent trend. But I love the way that you guys are approaching this about educating the consumer, and by extension of that, hopefully, like you said, unfortunately, the breach vector is going to become the home, which will cause more people to wake up. So again, James, thanks for your time again. Fantastic, all that you do in terms of your live cast. I don't know, five times a week.
Yeah, I mean, we do what I do. This week, I've done 8 live shows. 8 live shows this week alone. That's not including all the pre-recorded content that we put out in audio.
Wow, keep doing it, man. It's all great stuff. Again, thanks, James.
Awesome. Thank you.